The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. It was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Hello everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong here with Mr. Dan DuPont from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. Today is Thursday, March 28th, 2024. It's been still pretty quiet in Kilauea on the surface, a little bit more inflation through the tilt. We'll talk about that here briefly, Dan. But how are you today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, apologize to everybody for a little bit of late start. We will be back next week at our normal start time. This was a one-time delay, and yeah, we'll be back to our regular schedule again next week. But been doing pretty good. Just really busy, bunch of different things going on. So you taking advantage of this break from volcanic activity at the surface, at least. I know down below, lots of action, but yeah, at the surface, not a whole lot.
Yeah, so we'll get into it. We once again have a Volcano Awareness Month presentation. This week it's the Deep Pahala Earthquake presentation by Unified Bennington. So that was great, and we'll revisit that here. And as usual, we're continuing our donation drive, right? So we got that going on for you guys today. But otherwise, we miss our ASL interpreters today. We appreciate them when they are here. We're missing them today. And we can get into the summary. What do you think, Dane?
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Yeah. Any questions, drop them in the chat. Dane will be leading discussion there. And with that, off we go here. Let's get this switched around and put up our summary banner here. So in our Hawaiian volcano summary this week, we have inflation still ongoing on Kilauea. This is a sandhill tilt-meter showing the recent week has had a steeper, faster rate of inflation in that South Caldera, upper Southwest Rift connector area, more so than the previous rate, which had accumulated over the first 3 weeks of the month here on this graph. The earthquakes are still happening, but at a low rate. Here's a map of the last week. Here's a cluster of earthquakes covering that South Caldera area and southward out of the caldera into that upper Southwest Rift connector right through here. There does still appear to be some low-level activity all the way down the lower part of the rift zone. There's still that cluster at Pu'uko way over here. And the deep events and south flank events are still going as is normal as well. So really the earthquake rates, if we look at the graph here, are still around 40 to 60 earthquakes per week, or per day, I should say, right here, which is elevated over earlier in the week, but is not nearly matching the event counts we're having last month in February and at the end of January with the intrusion that caused the current slowdown. So that's the story on Kilauea. Until the earthquakes get a little bit more intense, there's still no reason to believe any surface activity resumption is shortcoming. So that'll still be happening in the long term, you'd imagine. Magma is still coming into the volcano, but there's no earthquake spike to lead us to match the inflationary trend we're seeing there. Maunaloa also remains quiet. Here's the earthquakes over the last 5 years per month, and here we are still at very low levels, seeming to stabilize after the big pulse of recharge following its eruption in late 2022. And that's the Hawaiian volcano summary for this week. So we'll go first to our hazard summary, which is just the gas. Now there's still some gas coming out. The newest measurement from USGS was 90 tons per day of SO2 within the last 10 days or so. Here you see the sensors that are operating in green at the National Park website. So there's everything in green. Even with those low values, there can be impacts to people nearby in the summit area. Here's what it looks like on the map. They also have charts, and since we're still missing our VOG mapping and forecast, we can look at a little bit more detail here. Each of these little green bars is a 15-minute interval. So we can just look and see that across the whole day, it's also been in the green, and there's really not been any concern in the area there. So thankfully, the hazards are low right now, and we'll turn to our observations here on Kilauea. So this past week, there was a release from the USGS on some new photographs of when they were checking routinely on their equipment, like the web cameras and those sorts of things. So there's our first image they've released, looking across that hardened crater floor with lots of that mineral buildup and gas over here. That central island here in the middle of the photograph, in the middle of that mineral buildup. And maybe you can see the shape of this drained western basin that was where lava lake was circulating for a long time from one direction to the other in there. So there are some bits of information they're releasing with the captions. So here's what they're saying. Geologists made a routine visit to check on equipment at the summit of Kilauea today and had clear views across the floor of Halema'uma'u. The central portion of this photo is a region where much of the lava lake activity has occurred over the previous few years, with the area now showing only wispy plumes of weak gas emission. The summit region has been quiet in recent weeks with low rates of seismicity and ground deformation. There it is once again. So let's come into the close-up. There's that little patch that's a little bit further north with mineral buildup as well. And here from this angle, you can see the edge of the crater where it becomes buried by the lava flows from September 2023, right there through there. And so that's that edge of it. But you can see that there's still plenty of gas coming out along that margin, and also plenty of white color, which is the mineral buildup, and some wispy fumes as well coming up through there. And so this photo shows the eastern portion. The circular area of yellow coloration near the top is a spot where the first lava fountain emerged in September 2023. So right there, that's the spot right there that we're showing as extra gas, where the first fountain erupted in 2023 in September. In the lower portion, the remains of Crater Room Drive and the Halema'uma'u parking lot are visible. So that's right there. There's that piece of road there, and another one there, and another one there, and there, and there. All the way down, you can see that path all the way down to here. Bits of the parking lot right there where it's a little bit wider. So that was from the 2018 collapse. Here, this is an interesting picture looking across. So a close-up of the central portion of the floor of Halema'uma'u. The small mound is a remaining portion of the island or raft of material formed in the early stages of the first crater-filling eruption in December 2020. That's right through there. You see some hornitos, these little mounds of lava on either side of it. We saw some fountains come up close by to here as well. There's another one over there. And these are all spots where we've seen lava come up in the past as well. And there's that eastern edge of that southwest lava lake right through there. Kind of like that. And so this is really interesting. Over in the background, you can see a bit of these other down-drop blocks that came into the crater back in 2018 as well. So this one's been lapped onto by this lava lake for a while here. And if you look through the rubble that also came falling off the sides of the cliffs here, that are bearing lots of material, you can see some bits of strata, like there's a piece of rock right there, and it looks like one over here as well. They're not quite collapsed, and they're still showing that original fill of the crater before 2018. So interesting stuff all around here in this picture, but not to dwell too long on that. We'll move on to the next photo release, which is of survey work, both on Kilauea and Hualai. So during this month, March 2024, HVO is conducting a GPS survey of Hualai for the first time since 2015. Also during March of 2024, the annual Kilauea Summit Gravity Survey is taking place. So here from a few days ago, Dr. Mike Poland, the summit of Kilauea, gravimeter and GPS station behind them. Right? So they're taking data of where they're collecting these measurements and marching this thing around where they can get measurements down there on the crater floor. And comparing this to the surveys they've done essentially almost every year, I want to say, right? Maybe it's every 2 years, but certainly within every 2 years. And tracking the movement of magma into the volcano. The reason that matters is because measurements of gravity over time can help monitor activity and determine changes. So I guess that wasn't the caption I was looking for here, but let's see here. No, we'll get to it a little further down, but essentially there was a period post-2018 collapse when we're not seeing inflation at the volcano, we're not seeing a gas release, but we were seeing gravity increases, and that was our sign that magma was filling the cracks, the voids that were still left on the ground after that collapse. So as a crater is moving and magma is coming and filling in, you're opening new cracks and it's able to move out of that main reservoir area into other side areas. Then you wonder, can it possibly be filling areas more passively and not showing as much inflation and not showing earthquakes? That's why you want to do the gravity every year or so to make sure that nothing's sneaking by you. Right? So one more tool in the toolkit there. So there they say that they connected a small gravity survey. Here they are once again. At each gravity station, a kinematic GPS station is deployed nearby for precise location data, used to correct for the variety of factors that influence gravity results, especially vertical deformation. Right? So if the ground is up higher than it was at previous time to measure gravity, it's going to measure it differently, and they have to know what the difference is to account for that, to try to get to that signal that's coming from something way down in the voids under the caldera. So this survey location is located near the CAL's Caldera South continuous GPS site and a continuous portion of Kilauea caldera that collapsed in 2018. The station has not been covered by lava in recent eruptions and is part of the telemetered network. So there it is. There's a kinematic GPS. Another different GPS station set up with a gravimeter nearby as well. It notes that it's a shoebox-sized instrument and it can measure the changing force of gravity to 1 in a billionth of the force that you feel every day. 1 in a billionth. Right? These are things that when I was in school, the thing that struck me was when you come close to like a mountain range, right? It doesn't actually only get the gravity up and down, but it'll feel the pull from the mountain from sideways and deflect the gravity that way too. That's how sensitive these things actually are. So here is really an interesting photograph. A volcano observatory scientist and a collaborator carry the gravity survey instruments across spatter deposits from the September 2023 summit eruption. Only one benchmark survived that eruption. Comparing data collected there to previous surveys will allow the scientists to see changes over time. So yeah, there is that inner wall of the downdrop block. And that fissure in 2023 came up pretty far up there, and it's actually a spot even further up. You see this drip of lava right here. It's covering some of this loose boulders, right? That came from that wall vent, September 2023. So pretty cool to see that with people in the same frame for scale. So interesting, they'll click the one benchmark, probably set up some new benchmarks so they can compare in the future to the following years, even if they can't measure them exactly point for point to what they did the previous years. One more here. Gravity measures detect subsurface mass change. For example, magma accumulation or removal beneath the surface. If magma is filling or draining void spaces, it may not be signaled by ground information or earthquake activity, but it will be signaled by gravity because of the mass change. In this way, gravity is a way of detecting changes in a magma reservoir that might otherwise be hidden. This photo shows scientists taking gravity measurements on the floor of Kilauea caldera. The scientist is straddling the gravimeter to shield it from the wind. I'm going to make sure it's staying still when it's trying to take its measurement. And if the wind is intense, that could be an issue there. One more here, the scientists take gravity measurements on the sloping floor of Kilauea. The scarp that formed as a result of the collapse is visible in the background of the photo with the spider cones that formed visibly steaming. So there it is. Nice panorama there. So back a few days further than that to the Hawaii GPS survey, we get some images of an area we don't normally get to see. They do note that they were not able to reoccupy the Hawaii sites for several years now, partly due to staff changes, partly due to COVID. But here they are catching back up once again. So at each location of the Hawaii campaign survey, a GPS unit is placed on a leveled tripod centered over a benchmark on the ground surface. Pictured here is a station Kipa at Kipa He'e crater. The precise location of the GPS is recorded by the receiver, housed in the yellow box, and the position is compared to previous years that the benchmark was occupied. So they're looking at, is it actual ground moving left to right or up and down through GPS that way? That's one of the first things they actually do, right? So the benchmark is there so they can reposition it in exactly the same spot as previous years and compare how that GPS location compares to previous years. So there's one of those. Here is the station KEHU, closer to the summit crater there. You see it's a instrument tower there. Summit further beyond in the background there. So the survey is usually done every 3 years. Has been conducted since 2015 due to eruptions at Kīlauea and Maunaloa, the pandemic, and staff personnel rotations. This photo is station KEHU, Ka'upulehu crater at the elevation of 6,213 feet on the northwest rift. This is near the source vent for Hawaii's most recent eruption of 1800 to 1801. So still under monitoring there. A few more. To conduct a Hawaii campaign survey, HVO requested permission from land managers before navigating to benchmarks cemented in the ground surface. Data collected at each location together provide a picture of how the ground surface has changed since the previous survey in 2015. It'll also provide important background information, supplementing and extending a several decades-long time series for monitoring Hawaii. So good to see them keeping up. There's the chief field engineer setting up a GPS station. The Kehu station. Another one, Kipa station there, further afield. So that's the release of the observations on the ground, going and looking at Hawaii as well as Kilauea here, and a little bonus Hawaii, even if it doesn't say on a banner. That's the visual update we have for today. So we'll turn now to the monitoring and just to check in with our USGS weekly update from this past Tuesday. Not really a whole lot of change in here. They are noting that during the past week, the rate of earthquakes were slightly increased over the last week, but still well below those detected during January, February intrusion or prior to recent summit eruptions. So the ranges of depths are about 0.3 to 1.6 miles below the surface and usually below magnitude 2. Deformation continues. SO2 rate was 90 tons per day on March 19th. Otherwise, they still note low levels of seismicity beneath the southwest rift zone The rates here saw a very slight increase over previous weeks, but daily counts remain well below those detected during intrusion. Nothing on the East Rift Zone, all being monitored. That's really it there. We'll move on from that monitoring text update. We can look at some of the other signals. So, I'll rewind it back up to our weekly signals. There's Kilauea from the Wikahuna station looking to the south, and this is a signal that last week we mentioned was seeming to mirror that South Caldera area, maybe more so than Halema'uma'u. Did show some inflation earlier in the week, maybe a little bit, or maybe not quite so much there, but really within this last few days, it has picked up there. When we look at Sand Hill, we'll see that the signal is more clear, and we can look at it again there. Earthquake counts have not really increased alongside that tilt increase here. And the ones that have been occurring have been at a fairly steady background rate here in this shallow surface. Pahala earthquakes have been going on, and if anything, a little slower than usual as well. So there's a map for the last week, as we pointed out in our summary. And yeah, we still have this big gap right through here. Right? So part of this is a naturally occurring gap that we saw in seismicity over here, but previously our earthquake swarm had earthquakes all the way down through here. So all those are really missing as well. So you have to wonder if there is still some blockage or something. There's still settling happening in these lower parts of the flank where we're still seeing GPS movement. But really, magma coming into the volcano more likely is gathering in this area up in here. Notably, that upper East Rift connector is not showing a whole lot of activity through here, and neither is Kauai, right? It seems to really be partitioned to this Southwest Rift connector area. So we'll just keep track of that as the patterns develop over time. So for the last month, it's more clear, this general inflation trend that suddenly accelerated within this past week here. That's the Wikahuna station for the last month. And finally, the Sand Hill station, there it is, the green line being the one pointing southeast to that upper Southwest Rift connector area, showing that clear rise. The one that points northeast is more towards Halema'uma'u rather than the South Caldera. So this signal maybe is telling us Halema'uma'u that was deflating. Now it seems to be stabilized over the past week. Not really inflating that much, but certainly not deflating as it was the previous week. And at the same time, this step up in rate at upper Southwest Rift. So together, you'd say that there's increased flow of magma into both areas, right? Maybe even the Halema'uma'u area where it's gone from deflating to flat, and from here where it's gone from inflating to even faster, right? If you look at the full range, this is almost 15 microradians. About a week ago, we're here, we'll call it 2. So maybe 13, 12 microradians there. And we come back to about a month ago, -10. So about half of that 24, 25 has been within the last week here. And the other half was the first 3 weeks of the month, to give you some idea of how much faster this rate of ground tilt happens to be. Right. And what's interesting is we have not seen significantly more earthquakes. Here's the last month. So you do see that, generally speaking, we have had this reactivation in the last few weeks, but compared to last week, today and this week is not anything different than what we saw previously there. Here's how it looks in the counts. And here we are, maybe a slight little bump, but still nothing like we saw previously. Here's earthquakes per week for the last year. Here's our January 31st spike, beginning in February, tailing off. And here we are. This is a little pulse we're talking about right here, is this little one right there. This little bump right here is our current trend. So interesting. Zooming out to earthquakes per month. For the last 5 years here, we're approaching the end of the month in March, and we're not quite there yet, but thus far, you can see our March totals of earthquakes are not nearly what they were in February or January or December or November, and back and back and back, right? So it's been a while since we've had this low kind of earthquakes. Low for Kilauea here. We're looking at still over 1,000 earthquakes in a month, right? But we're not looking at is 3,500, between 3,000 and 4,000 per month. GPS. This is the distance north and south across the caldera, and we're still showing spreading. The line's going more positive, going up on the graph here. And in fact, over the last week here, you can see the similar pattern where it actually seems to be extending at a faster rate. Right? It almost had stalled here prior week. We'd wondered if the center of inflation had shifted to the south. Perhaps it did. And this is maybe telling us that it's also including some of that caldera area as well a little bit now, since that's also resumed its expansion. And so really, we're missing the earthquakes. It wouldn't be surprising to see earthquakes start to ramp back up, but they haven't done so yet. Maybe it has to build up some more. How much space in there is maybe determines how long that takes, and whether that space is leaky, whether it can keep leaking down the southwest rift, or whether it actually can pressurize to build that back up. On the east rift at Pu'o'o, unchanged, it's still contracting, no magma evidence through there. That's the GPS for the 1 year. If we come to our 2-year GPS, look at some of these signals around the caldera, we're not really seeing that much of a rise anymore in the last week here. Still some changes, but some interesting little wiggles happening in some of these stations, showing this dynamic nature of where the volcano is inflating, maybe shifting around once again. But we're not seeing those stations rising so much, right? So that's why we're not seeing the earthquakes, even though there is some swelling of the ground and filling, and the instruments are very sensitive to small changes like that. It's not really to the point of cracking the rock around it, having moved it and done all that work in the previous 2 months. And once again here, up and down signal not showing very much, and this is our crater rim station. And so that's all the summit stations. At Ahua, this is that upper southwest Kauai area, rising still a little bit, but not so much. Puhimau really dropping there, it looks like. Devil's Throat, it seems like it's dropping there as well. So there's further areas of the Kauai settling down, and really the area is shrunk back towards the summit is the other thing to see here. Right? And everything else is pretty close to what it was doing before, including Pahala still moving east and southeast and rising. Kīlauea not rising, but still moving southeast as well. And that's why that lower southwest rift adjustment is in evidence here, right? And even further up as well. So that's the GPS. It's the little bit we have to monitor, and it's changing very suddenly here these days until the earthquakes come back up. We can look at earthquakes over the previous couple of days by depth once again. There they are. I think this gives a little bit different snapshot, and some stuff still background around Maunaloa, but here's where it's clustering within the last couple of days, right through there, just outside of the main caldera, but within that greater caldera to the south. Let's see if I can get it zoomed in even further here. Right. There is that main caldera where the big cliff is right there. The great caldera, as I just described it, is that outermost set of cracks from collapse from long ago. So you can see it where lava flows have pounded against it and goes something like this through here. And maybe there includes Kilauea and goes all the way out, something like that, more or less. Right. So still within that area outside the main caldera, it's somewhere in here that this connection moves off to this southwest rift connector. That's this path right here, paralleling the Kauai fault zone, which are these lines and cracks going this way right through here. Right. So Devil's Throat's all the way over here. These are the areas, the further areas that were rising up during that earthquake swarm that are no longer showing activity, and now it's more the areas closer in to there. So that's the earthquakes. I'll flash up some earthquakes, recent earthquakes here. I can put it up and let's zoom it back out and change our settings so we can see all of the past, let me get the filters, all of the past 2 weeks here. It's showing the deep ones. I gotta zoom in and for me to see the smaller ones. Yep, there they are. Well, background activity, all different depths across the island here. Some shallow ones, but no big clusterings. We do see some on Mauna Loa's east flank here, not in any concerning amounts, but you can see that that thing has been moving and active. South flank of Kilauea, a little cluster further down here, showing maybe movement of the south flank. This whole thing is in some way connected, right? So you can get a lot here. You expect to have a few less here and a few less here, but not for them to be gone entirely. That usually happens further down the rifts in there. So nothing concerning here in the map for the earthquakes. So we'll move on to Maunaloa as the last thing, having mentioned this in-between zone. This connection of the southwest rift of Kilauea to the southeast flank of Maunaloa, right? Maybe is influencing what's happening at Maunaloa from Kilauea as well, as we've described recently. So we can look at Maunaloa signals. Here's a summit tilt. It's got some wiggles. We're not sure exactly what exactly is causing these. They have very small magnitude here. They could be connected to that movement of the flank, or maybe some other cycles that we're not aware of here. But earthquakes have not been very numerous. There's only been 37 within the last month in that summit area, spanning all different depths within the last week here. Those are the ones, a couple deeper ones, a couple shallower ones, nothing really that exciting here. Earthquake rates are still per day 1 to 2 over the last week here. So not much going on. Here's that deep earthquake spike from late last year. And our decline has been quite significant since then. And that follows, this is all zoomed in, right? Earthquakes per week of 120 here. That's the bump that shows up over here. Yeah, 200 earthquakes per month, not even coming close to what we had prior to the eruption. All this other stuff of the previous 5 years here. So that is Maunaloa. And with that, we'll do one last thing here before we come to our community corner. That's the Volcano Watch. There is a new Volcano Watch this week using acoustic signals to identify the start of a 22 Maunaloa eruption. This is posted if you want like the full text. He does get a little technical in here. But the bottom line here is that the eruption first captured on a web camera at 11:36 p.m. Hawaiian time, right here. But they do have an infrasound array deployed at Ainapo. And when you look at some of the signals here, like this is the azimuth of the direction of the sonic signal from that station. And usually you give noise from all over the place, this way, that way. It's just the wind blowing over here, and the noise is not coming from one area in particular, right? So that's what this background is. And you can see that one eruption is well underway. That's this area on the right of the graph here. It's really from that azimuth of 300 degrees from where this array is actually placed. So the webcam images where this is timed, where this gray line is right here. But if you look at the sonic evidence, it does look like that pattern of coming from that direction there was actually initiated right over here. And that corresponds to 11:25 or 6 p.m. on the plot here. And then they also account for the distance of the station and the travel speed of the sound waves from the summit to this area, taking about 2 minutes. And so they actually are now saying that the evidence points to early onset of the eruption at 11:23 p.m. Hawaiian Standard Time. So we're splitting some hairs here. It doesn't exactly matter at this point, but maybe it would have been nice if everyone else would have had an extra 12 minutes too there, right? 13 minutes, if there had been some, or maybe perhaps that did help them trip the alarm and put out their information sooner. So that's the long and short of this article. There's all kinds of interesting stuff in here. Acoustic is just one of these other tools in the toolkit that include seismic information, gas, and webcams. So of course you love having webcams. Webcam image was maybe close enough for our purposes, but there's a lot of other ways to detect these things, and that is one of them. So that is infrasound. And I thought I would put up one bonus Volcano Watch this week, and this is something we'll go into in more detail next week. But let's see, I think I missed my Maunaloa, but we'll make it say Maunaloa there and Volcano Watch too. And I'll jump to my next historic Volcano Watch. This is from March 29, 2018. And we are actually today marking the anniversary of that first earthquake of the sequence that began the Ka'u crisis in 1868. There was thought to be that magnitude 7.9 on April 2nd, 1868. The magnitude 7.1 that set it off March 28th. And that's our anniversary today. So there's a lot more we can get into, and we'll save that for next week. But a little bit just from this one article here. This is one of the churches at Waiohino in Ka'u, that after that 7.9, you see there's just a pile of rubble with the roof atop there. Some people standing nearby there. right? So the Great Ka'u earthquake had the same maximum intensity as a 1906 San Francisco earthquake. This defined as extreme shaking was felt as far away as Kauai and stopped clocks on Oahu. In Ka'u, where people were bounced like balls from shaking that went on for several minutes, the destruction was nearly total. Stone buildings and walls were destroyed as far away as Hilo. People had trouble actually getting places because the roads all had cracks in them that even the horses couldn't cross back in those days. So it was pretty widespread destructive there. The one account that I read that's really striking was people down there in that area near Pahala, in that slopeland, hanging on to the weeds on the ground so they wouldn't just keep rolling off down the slope, which is pretty intense, right? I talk about trees getting uprooted from just the earthquake shaking. That's pretty intense as well. So there was also a big mudslide, as it was then known, but really it's a landslide that had characteristics of flow, right? A lot of red dirt coming down. They, in talk at the time, called it the eruption of ash, but it was really a landslide of red dirt. It came down and buried 31 people and a whole bunch of livestock as well and farmland. There was a tsunami of at least 8 waves over several hours, more than 20 feet in height in Ka'u. I think I've seen somewhere maybe 60 feet inundation inland. Damage went all the way from South Point, Kalai, to Kipkumukahi and Kapoho, destroyed more than 100 structures and took 47 lives. That was just the tsunami, 47, right? There's lava flow, there's landslide, there's tsunami that all killed people during this crisis that lasted a while, right? So by next week, we'll be past April 2nd, but we'll then recap that whole sequence for you guys, because that is one of the more intense things that's happened on the island. That's a great chance for us to educate ourselves for what to be prepared for in the extreme case, not to be dramatic about this stuff, but just to try to document what the history does show us. Right, so the island was sparsely populated in 1868. This was all during a décollement. Here is a cross section of where this would have been. This structure right here is that seafloor sediment, and there's that volcanic pile on top of it, and the boundary between the two is the one that allows the volcanoes above it to move. So it's thought to have been somewhere around 10 kilometers, 6 miles deep, somewhere in there, right? That's really a flank earthquake, not really like the deep Pahala earthquakes we're seeing recently. And so here's their one version of a map of the actual land displaced. The epicenter would have been here, not too far to the east of Pahala, and encompassing an area that goes all the way from South Point, including the whole southwest rift of Maunaloa, the northeast rift of Maunaloa, Kauiki fault zone to Kilauea, and Kilauea's whole east rift zone all the way across. That's a massive area to have moved. There are a couple theories of how this occurs. We'll get into next week. One of them is that everything was just moved all at one time. The other, that it might have been in 2 different patches. You might have had a 7-1 that might have been, let's say, this zone over here. Then you might have had a 7-9 that might have been this zone over here, for example, overlapping as well. So there were certainly 2 big ones, but the ground was shaking much of the time in between from the 27th on, and we can get into the details there, right? But 16 days of volcanic crisis that accompanied an eruption of Maunaloa. Maunaloa began erupting at the summit March 27th. Earthquake swarms, intrusion in the southwest rift. Big earthquakes happened. Eventually, there was another eruption on the lower flank. That was the Kahuku eruption in 1868. There and after that first week of April. So crazy stuff. Really, before 2018, right? If you lived in the 1800s, this would have been your event that everyone talked about. Where were you? What happened? How did it go? That was really, everyone could tell. Dan, you want to jump in and say something here?
I was just going to say, that would have been the one that legends are written about, those types of giant earthquakes or once in a lifetime type events. You don't want to get 2 of them, right? 1 is enough, but actually going through one of those, and remember when we talk about the magnitudes of earthquakes, it's nonlinear, right? So there's a dramatic increase between each level, each one to a magnitude 6.9 or 7, like in 2018, versus basically a magnitude 8. It's not just, one times bigger, it's many times
Right.
bigger.
Yeah, it was huge, right? And so maybe, one thing that's interesting, I mean, we don't really know how big it actually was. We don't have seismic records of that time. We just have the damage and the reports to go on, right? And the challenge really of the time, just to give you a little teaser, is that no information was instant. So everyone was like, "Oh, I saw so and so happened." So, well, exactly when and where was that? And then to have that game of telephone back to somewhere that can print it. How much is actually true and how much was distorted, right? Because there are certainly places where that there are errors, for sure you catch them, and other areas where you're just not sure. It could be an error, it could not be an error. How do you take it? So that's really hard to navigate that part of it there. But
Right.
yeah, that was a huge thing. This is actually a 2-part Volcano Watch. We'll bring the second half next week, and we may maybe go into more detail on that instead of a volcano awareness talk next week. So we'll see. We'll leave that as a teaser here, but that is the week that we're coming into now. Beginning of April, April becoming Tsunami Awareness Month, kind of goes along with that because of the Great Kaiwa earthquake. Corresponds to that as well, right? Not to mention the 1960 earthquake too, and tsunami. So we'll get into that coming up in April as well. So, but that's Volcano Watch for this week. For our community corner, I just wanted to remind everybody that the national park is still taking input and congestion solutions until 3 days from now, March 31st, to get them in on the national park website. Beyond that, there's still construction happening up there. And here is a summary of those areas: Wikahuna parking area, Critterum Drive West entrance, the visitor center. I did take a picture, but I forgot to put it up here of the new construction happening there near the entrance. Find out later, maybe a little later here, but yeah, we'll update you guys on that as we can. But they have broken ground, have cleared vegetation, or going forward there. So, okay. I heard a concerning click that looks like my my power might be going out here, you guys. So let me do something. Let me just really quick. Dang. So yeah.
And we do our thing.
So
and then you come back and tell us what's going on.
Yeah, I was basically done with that. Right from this, I was going to pass it to you guys to do our thank yous and donations, and we're going to switch to our video.
Good timing. So
if I'll work on that and then come back, and maybe one of you could also find the video that I dropped to you earlier and line it up from your end in case my connection gets cut here.
Gotcha. All right. So why don't you go ahead and take care of that, and we will bring on Lou, 2 pineapples. Hey there, Lou. How you doing?
Good evening. I'm doing good. How you doing?
All right. So yeah, we'll buy Philip a little bit of time there, and
talk about
talk about our little donation drive that we're coming into the final stretch on.
Yes, we are at 1 week. I think next week is the last week of our donation drive that we've been doing since March 6th. And I have a video I'll drop up on here. Let's see if I can get things going. And then we're going to talk about a little something we're going to do tomorrow, aren't we?
Yes, sir. So yeah, I want to get that going. I'm just getting this backup going in case we have issues that Philip must step away for, so we can continue the.
There we go. So like we talk about all the time during this donation drive, we're up to $1,598. Everything that comes in supports our programs, from the volcano education to the community resilience and strengthening that we're doing. We really appreciate it. To all of our, there's our list. I don't know, Larry, Brian, Pat, Tiggy, Gustav, Kim, Momo, Sumik, Skagit, Hal, Breezy, I lost it. We talked about that last week.
Mary S, Tim H, Tom, Kathy, Peek, Julie. I saw Louise.
Wasn't gonna make it. I wasn't gonna make it. I started too late. Maybe next week I'll give it the whole gauntlet run.
Right, we gotta do something for that.
All right,
I don't know if anybody has any idea for who reads the thing and why.
Yeah,
be appreciated.
We just gave an example of who might have a better shot at this. So
Either that or we just add a dice to the thing with 3 sides on it.
So thank you to everybody that's donated. To those who have, we really appreciate it. To those who can't, we understand. Please just take a second and share out the stream, thumbs it up. That helps tremendously. We appreciate your support when you show up here on a Thursday night or any other time when we're doing something. We were just live on Tuesday night for an After Dark in the Park presentation, another one of our programs, filming and live streaming the cultural events. If you attended anything that we live stream and filmed during Volcano Awareness Month, I think we did, what did we do, 12 total? I think we did 12 total videos and live streams during Volcano Awareness Month, the entire month of January. So thank you to everybody that attended those online. Hope you enjoyed them. We want to definitely build this program up. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so we really depend on our viewers, people that support us, so that we can set up and keep doing these types of things and get ready and know that we're going to be able to do them next year. So thank you all very much. Dane, would you like to tell everybody what we're doing tomorrow?
Yeah, so tomorrow we have a special little event planned for our community online. Everybody that watches the live streams tomorrow at 11 a.m. Hawaii Standard Time, we will be going live from the caldera. At least Lou will. I'll be on the other end so we can try and work some magic. We're going to try some new things, try and up the game a little bit, but we're also just going to talk story about how we got here, where HVary is going, some of its projects that we're working on, and try and give you guys an inside look as to, because we keep saying like, oh, we've been really busy. It's like the volcano isn't doing anything. How are you guys busy?
What are you guys really doing, right?
We have a whole bunch of things that we end up doing outside of just this live stream, right? And there's a lot of work that goes into the live stream, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes outside of the live stream. So we'll be talking about a lot of those different aspects, from our digital resilience program to AI, and some more tidbits that we will talk in tomorrow.
Yeah, and during all of that, we will have multiple cameras running. I'm going to set up most likely at least 3 cameras that'll spread out through the caldera. We'll be able to go through it a little bit, give you some good close-ups of what's been going on. I always like to go down into where the sulfur ring is and check out the steam that's coming up. Any of the walls that might have changed, we'll zoom in on some of those. Kind of take a look around, do a caldera tour, so to speak, while we're up there filling in on all the information about HVary and just hanging out. It's a fun thing to do. The only thing is weather. We've got to watch the weather. We can't put all the gear out in the soaking rain, so that might affect us a little bit. But that's a good time of the day for us that we're going up to do it. So we should be all right. I will get up there and I'll hang out as long as I can for it to clear. So give it our best shot. So please join us tomorrow. It'll be fun. It's Friday. It'll be loose. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. One more week of the donation drive. The link is in there. hvary.org/donate is the best place to donate, because we get 100% of it. We don't have to split it with YouTube here. If you can only donate here through YouTube, that's fine. Super chat in here. You can also go on to my 24/7 live stream. I have it set up as an HVary fundraiser so that 100% of the proceeds come into HVary. It's an actual business fundraiser set up through YouTube. So you have some options. Pick whatever you like. We also have a mailing address. You can mail us a check. Anyway, I could even send Dane to go meet you down for some tacos, and he'll pick up a check down there.
Right. All right. Well, thank you, Lou, and we will see you tomorrow. And we'll be live on, I think, a little bit of everything, right? All the different channels, and kind of everybody's welcome to join, no matter what platform.
Everybody, please.
Yep. All right.
Make sure you check your community tab. Check your community tab. We'll put the information up there a good hour before we go live. So just in case you don't get a notification, make sure your notification bell is hit. But just in case you don't get a notification, check the community tab. The link will be in there.
All right.
That's it.
Well, thank you, Lou. And we will see you tomorrow. All right.
Laters.
And we'd like to thank our other supporter, the County of Hawaii, through the Puna Strong grant and the Kilauea recovery grant. We have been so gracious to receive both of those and help support our work and the stream and the work that we're doing in the digital resilience hubs. So there'll be more to come soon on that front, but we appreciate them helping us out. And we did have a $2 super chat just come through from James Olson with no comment. Appreciate the support there. All right. I think that gets us through our thank yous and through our little highlights of the donation drive and the thing that we have planned tomorrow. And maybe we can go ahead and carry on, huh? How's the power? Are you good to go?
Yeah, I'm on backup. So
All right.
we're okay. Yeah, everything worked out, so I didn't actually have to disrupt. So good test there.
All right.
Yeah. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do actually. 1 second here. So we had one from Nicholas a little bit earlier. You're talking about the two connectors. He says, could those two connectors increase the pressure on Kilauea to erupt since the pathways to magma is occluded? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, I mean, yeah. So it's all, yeah. I mean, it's a good question, Nicholas. I mean, it's all about which areas can the magma access and fill and pressurize, and all those areas will fill until it actually will build and erupt, right? So we did see it early on following 2018 eruptions collapse. Magma came in silently, was picked up by gravity, and then we saw it building up, mostly inflating in that summit caldera area. And then over time, it started working its way further south. We started having intrusions in the south part of the caldera there, and earthquake swarms down that southwest rift connector. So that's where you might think there's actually maybe more space there for the magma to then fill that area and not build pressure as quickly before it can actually up to the surface. But it's not staying open or have you, right? One thing that I want to point out in this map is, you know, what I mentioned briefly is that we had earthquakes during that intrusion all the way through all here, right? So it looks like whatever is pressurizing in here now seems to have some new blockage, which might be more temporary or more permanent, who knows, right? But that was not present when a pressure actually really got high in end of January there. So a lot of factors to go into it there, but that's generally the idea that, you know, that the area involved, as you start seeing it pressure, if let's say that this is a more permanent break, and let's say that it's closed off here and here as well, and if you only can pressurize this area and it can't get anywhere else, then yeah, eventually imagine these earthquake counts would grow higher and higher and higher and higher and would lead to some eruption just in this localized area. So that could be the case, or it could reoccupy one of these many areas we've seen recently reoccupied: Upper East Rift Connector, Kauai Fault Zone, that middle and lower southwest rift as well. And so that's what we're still waiting to see. And as it's recovering and rebuilding back up, it's starting at the center and working its way out, and we'll see how far it progresses. But yeah, it's a good little review there.
Question from BPS asks, can you explain the Maunaloa tilt blue line versus green line? What does the blue line and green represent?
Okay, I guess I could find that and put it up here. It's the same for all the tilt stations, really, but let's just take this one for example. So up in this top corner, there is this little key with these two numbers. These are azimuth directions. So 328. So north would be 0 or 360. So 328 is, what is that? 32 degrees west of north. All right, so it's northwest-ish there. 58. It's close to 60. That's, you know, not quite 45. It's not quite straight northeast at 45 degrees. It's a little bit east northeast, but that's the direction that thing is pointing, right? So the trick is that with those directions, those kind of go both ways, right? So whether the line goes up or down is usually calibrated to magma filling within that summit area. So if the magma is filling in a summit area, you can expect the blue line to go up, generally speaking. So it's tuned that way. So by that, I mean that, you know, this number, what I found is that this number 328, it might mean 328, but it also might mean 328 or 180 degrees off of that. So 148 would be the other one, yeah, corresponding direction. So like a seesaw, it's a matter of which way you want it to be up or down, but it's still tilting along that same direction. So that, yeah, all tilt meters do that, but they're all a little bit different. So, you know, this one MOK station is 328, 58. If I go back to the Kilauea ones, let's find some Kilauea ones here. Sand Hill happens to be 226 and 316, and that's how we know which way these are pointed and what areas are pointed to. And you can see Wikahuna is at 327. There used to be a second green line on here that has not put out any data for years, but the graph has not changed and still says no data up there. But that one would have been in the 312 direction when it was showing up. Yep, so that's it. Yeah. Do I have a straight Wikahuna one? But that's basically it there. I don't know if we go any further than that, I don't believe. But good question. Good to review that as well.
Nope, I was muted. All right. Well, we have one more question here from Benjamin, who asks, are there any recordings of the events leading up to the 1868 earthquake?
There's some, right? There's some. The whole sequence, yeah. So there are several written records. There was Hawaiian papers, letters of Hawaiian papers. There was a reconnaissance mission that was done by Reverend Titus Cone after the fact. He came through and walked around and met everyone, and that's someone who was describing other areas. So we know what his style of description and observation is. So that's at least a common point of reference. And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But it did go on for a while. So one of the accounts that I read, the people had suffered through that first earthquake and the next almost 2 weeks of earthquakes, and finally they're like, that's enough, and they went and they left, and an eruption began after they left. So in that case, they didn't catch eruption, right? So it kind of depends on what and where, but there are certainly some accounts. There's a lot of information actually, because there was shaking felt as far as Kauai. They felt it on Oahu. They actually could see the fog from the eruption. Had to sail through it. The king of Hawaii, Kamehameha V, actually heard about that first earthquake and all the things afterwards, eruption. He sent a relief party, and sailed here on a ship with a bunch of relief supplies and all of that. There's all kinds of stuff that is known. It was like I said, it was one of those events where everyone recounts where they were, what they were doing, what was going on. Similar to us in 2018, right? So this is if we're going to bring up anything from the past, this is one of the events we really should not be forgetting. It was super, super important, and people moved away from Kau. Kau has never been as inhabited really since then, because people didn't want to be there. They're like, this is good for pasture land, but not for people to live. This was way too intense for me. I left and never came back. So
related question
there.
Yeah, and a related question Nicholas asked was just the second part. The first part was very similar to the one we just answered. Was the Kauquake event bigger than 2018 eruption in scale?
Yes. Yeah, the Kauquake was thought to be a combination of a 7.1 and a 7.9, and the one in 2018, just the earthquake itself was it 6.7? Is it, or 6.9?
It's not 6.9.
6.9. Yeah. So, and then eruption wise, that's a whole different part of the story, right? There wasn't as much lava that came out in 1868 eruption in Maunaloa. A lot of it was because once the flank moved out of the way, that makes more space in the rift zone, right? If you imagine having, even if you only move it, let's say 1 meter, I shouldn't say only, that's kind of average, but it's still a massive amount, right? And the thing happens to be, 5 kilometers tall and 20 kilometers long. You've made cubic kilometers of space down there for magma. So you can have all this pressure suddenly have the space to go in, and that's why it pushes the flank out of the way. But then when a flank moves, it creates cracks. Those cracks are weaknesses, and magma likes to come up and erupt through them. But eruptions aren't really necessarily that huge in that case for the uprift eruptions. Like that pool, there was the draining of Kilauea in 2018, Kilauea summit, that really sent all the lava down rather than anything like what we're talking about Maunaloa here. So we get into it more next week. This week we do have a presentation from Volcano Awareness Month on Pahala earthquakes, which are all the deeper ones, that I thought would be a good way to start. And then next week we'll follow up with how what we saw in 1868 was different and related to the eruption rather than what's happening now. Anything else we can follow up with on that, Dane? Yeah.
Nope. I think let's get into it. This is a good presentation, though. I like this one. Just Pahala is such an interesting, complex area. So having somebody that has a little bit more insight is very appreciated.
Right. So, okay, let me get the thumbnail up here. This is going to be the talk from January 18th, 2024 by earthquake specialist Ninfa Bennington. Why are earthquakes happening deep beneath Pahala? There it is. So let's get this on, and then I will get us off the screen here while this runs. This is a little less than 20 minutes. So here it goes. This is the highlights from this talk in Pahala.
Thanks for coming, everybody. It's nice to see so many people. So I thought I'd start by showing you guys how the amount of seismicity, the number of earthquakes in the area, has increased in the last 10 years. So if we look up to about 2015, at that point, the Pahala area was seeing only about 7, maybe even less earthquakes per week deep beneath the surface. So thinking between 13 and about 25 miles below the surface of this big Pahala region. Then in 2015 and 2016, you can see here these little rectangles start to get a little higher, and suddenly we were cruising at something like 20 or 30 earthquakes a week happening here deep beneath this region. Finally, in 2019, we saw this huge escalation in activity. And if anyone here actually lives within this region, you know this without me even showing this figure. By the time we got to mid-2020, there were something like 500 earthquakes happening between 15 and 25 miles beneath the surface here in a single week. To my knowledge, this is some of the highest rates of seismicity anywhere in the world. So pretty crazy, dramatic stuff. This all peaked in late 2021, when we got to something as much as 800 earthquakes a week happening deep beneath Pahala. So truly remarkable. Now, the good thing is that this activity has started to go down, and I've plotted here up to about a week ago. And now Pahala is experiencing about 200 earthquakes every week between 15 and 24, 25 miles below the surface. So that is still a gigantic number of earthquakes happening, but the amount that we were experiencing even a couple years ago was truly remarkable. So now what I'm really interested in is, why are all these earthquakes happening here? This is an amazing rate of seismicity. So before I get into that, I thought I would just show spatially where these events are happening as we went in time in the last decade. So I'm just going to show little month-long periods of earthquakes and where they're happening on the Big Island. So this is in 2014. Within the Pahala region, only about 100 earthquakes in a whole month. So things were pretty quiet. By 2017, you start seeing a much denser clustering of earthquakes in the region. So pretty quiet. Just a few years later, starting to get more and more seismicity. If we go to 2019, when we saw that something like 40-fold increase in the number of earthquakes happening here, suddenly you can see this dense kind of pancake structure of earthquakes happening between about 15 and 24 miles below the surface. Finally, in 2021, here's our peak. This is a huge amount of earthquakes happening for a single month in the area. And then finally, in 2022, this is sort of the end of the peak. You see still this dense cluster of earthquakes all across the region. And then finally here, I pulled just the last month of earthquakes. So things have gotten quieter for sure if we pan between, say, a year ago and now. But we still are seeing a tremendous amount of activity here. So I was also interested in figuring out, what are the size or the magnitude of these earthquakes that people are feeling? So there's a ton of earthquakes happening, down to magnitude 0s and all the way up to magnitude 4s. But which are the ones that are really affecting people that they're taking note of? So I looked through what are called Did You Feel It reports. And these are reports where people who've experienced an event can go online and fill out how they experienced the earthquake. And basically, any earthquake that had 3 of those reports, I looked at the magnitude. And what I found was that these events that I'm plotting here were the ones that really were ones people took note of. They were magnitude 3 and 4 earthquakes happening within the region. I found it was a real range of experience. It could be as much as just someone sitting there and thinking, gosh, did something happen? Was there an earthquake? That's kind of the lower end of our intensity scale. And then on the other side, these events, some of the bigger ones, actually cause things like furniture to move, plaster to fall off walls, windows to break, things to fall out of your cabinets. So it's a pretty big range, but all of this is happening fairly frequently here relative to the rest of the island. And I guess at this point, I just want to encourage people, if you're feeling an earthquake and you live on the Big Island, please fill out one of these Did You Feel It reports. They're really important, not only for understanding how that earthquake you experienced affected the island, but they're also used for understanding if we have other earthquakes in the similar area. We can kind of forecast what the island how the island will be affected based on your reports. So super important to do. I'd encourage everyone to do it if you have time. So these are the events that people actually kind of took notice of as based on those Did You Feel It reports. So you can see that, earlier on, pre-2019, there weren't a lot of events that affected the community in any way. Maybe one event every so often. Then in mid-2018, there was kind of this uptick, several events within, say, a month that people took note of as kind of affecting them. However, then when we get into 2019, 2020, and onward, you see that there's a large number of earthquakes that people are being affected by. And again, that could just be, sitting in their house and just feeling a little rumble, or it might be something like some light damage happening. So, these Pahala events are having a big effect on our community in terms of folks down here in Pahala. So because of that, we're really interested in understanding why these earthquakes are happening and what do they mean for the island at large. So here I'm just showing, these are a couple different studies that have been done on Pahala. The bottom one is a study that was done in 2015 on Pahala. I'll get my pointer. Basically, it's taking these earthquakes that you see here in map view, so that's as if you were looking down on the island, and instead plotting them where they're located in depth under the ground that we're standing on. And if you plot these with depth, they form a line. So they just have a linear trend, as you can see here. And that connects from the south end of the island all the way to beneath Kilauea, very deep. So thinking like 15 to 25 miles below the surface. So one of the big questions is, what does this line of seismicity mean? And how is it possibly or possibly not connected to Kilauea? So in this study, they said, well, it's sort of interesting to note this south end of the island is where the hotspot is thought to come up. And around those depths is where we see the start of this Pahala seismicity. So kind of around here. And this seismicity keeps trending towards Kilauea. It's happening very deeply. So perhaps this particular line of earthquakes is acting as kind of a magma pathway towards Kilauea. So that was a hypothesis that these authors put forth. And then the other question was, this seismicity, these earthquakes are terminating deep below Kilauea. So is it possible there's a connection? If this area serves as sort of a magma pathway, is there a connection between this area and Kilauea's shallow volcanic storage system? And I will say that study was one of the first to really start to look at all these earthquakes happening in Pahala. There's been a more recent study that's gotten quite a bit of press, this paper by Wilding et al., where they used some more novel methods that have come out in the last couple years or so to identify even more earthquakes happening beneath Pahala. So here's a 3D picture of the region, and there's this big cloud here that's similar to this big cloud of earthquakes that are happening beneath Pahala, just in 3D. And what they saw were a bunch of earthquakes happening here, kind of breaking into two types of earthquakes. They saw tons of these earthquakes called volcanotectonic events. And volcanotectonic events basically mean you're breaking rock. So you can think about if you were at a volcano and you saw these sorts of events, as you're trying to push magma through up to erupt, you're going to have to open fractures and break rock to get that magma through. So being able to see these sorts of events is one clue that maybe there's magma moving along in some particular region. But you can also have these sorts of events for all sorts of things. You could have them in a fault zone in California, for example. So they don't definitively tell us that, oh, there's melt in this region. They're just one possible clue. The other type of earthquake they saw were sort of hybrid events. So events that suggest movement of fluids as you're breaking rock. But those were in much lower numbers. So I would say the jury's sort of still out as to whether or not this region is acting as transport for magma from the hotspot through this mantle region, so through this deep region. Additionally, this study suggested that they found more earthquakes moving vertically towards Kilauea. And these earthquakes were of that type I was telling you about, these rock-breaking kind of events. So again, little clues that maybe this is a magma pathway into Kilauea from Pahala, but maybe not. More work needed to be done. Luckily, technology has been developed that allows us to have new, quick, easy-to-deploy research seismometers. So these aren't the kind that we use at HVO where they're relaying back data in real time. But they are still very good at recording the ground motions happening due to all sorts of different earth signals, including earthquakes. And they're really small. So I have one here, actually. It weighs about 6 pounds. We throw a bunch of these in our backpacks. We hike around different areas that we're lucky enough to hike around, like Kau, around Pahala and Naalehu. And we set out these little seismometers for about 3 months. So we bought at HVO about 80 of these and collected, well, because there's just so much earthquake activity here, these instruments probably collected something like 10,000 or more earthquakes in that time. It was a particularly active point. We were very lucky to have put these out when there was quite a bit of seismicity happening beneath Pahala. We've now got our data set. It's gigantic. Now we have a few different ways that we want to tackle looking at the data to try and really understand what's happening in Pahala and how it might relate to Kilauea or Maunaloa. So we have 3 different methods, and I'll talk on all 3. So machine learning is something that's happening all around us in various disciplines. It's teaching computers to understand some particular behavior or some pattern recognition of any sort of any kind. So suddenly we're able to find something like 40, 50 times more earthquakes in our data than we could with kind of more old-fashioned methods. Now at Pahala, there's not going to be an eruption, but what we're interested in is if we have magma moving through the region really deep. And then looking for these same sort of events in earthquakes we see that are moving from Pahala into that deep Kilauea system. We're hoping to start to fill in the gaps and see more earthquakes along this path to Kilauea and then vertically going towards Kilauea's volcanic system. So these are kind of our hopes and dreams for what we might see. Right now we're processing all that data using the machine learning methods. Next I'm going to talk about seismic tomography. The idea in seismic tomography is to take advantage of all these earth signals that are generated by earthquakes and then travel through the earth before arriving at seismometers at the surface. And we're going to try to create an image of what it looks like below the surface at Pahala. Because these earthquakes are all creating waves that are sampling through different parts of the deep earth beneath the Pahala region, as well as up by Kilauea. So I'm really excited to see what we end up getting. This is a work in progress, though. So maybe next year I can report on some images. That would be a nice, happy ending. This is the final method that we're using for the data. It's something called receiver function analysis. This is done by one of our collaborators at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Dr. Helen Januszewski. In this case, while I'm interested in the broad picture of where melt is stored and how it connects to Kilauea, Helen's work more focuses on really fine details. So basically, as if you were to slice a piece of cake through the earth and look really discreetly at what the structure looks like for that small sort of piece of cake. So I've circled in red here. We had this line of stations, these little guys, separated only by about 100 meters or so each, and they form this line. And what Helen's work does is looking at the data along this line to get at the structure at more like tens to maybe 100 meter scale. So again, I'm interested in big picture, and then she's going to complement it by giving me what's the structure and what's going on in Pahala at really small scale, but just for this little picture, this little slice through the region. So this is a pretty busy figure, but it's just to show you the kind of data we collect. So each of these lines represents the seismic data collected at a particular node. So again, we're looking at really subtle ground motion due to some earthquake happening. Helen's work relies on using global earthquakes. So earthquakes happening all over the world that are larger and end up traveling through the earth and then coming really deeply into Pahala. So for her, she's looking really deep to really shallow on this really small slice through the region. I just wanted to pause and really thank everyone in Pahala, Na'alehu, just the whole area, because everyone in the community was so integral to this research getting done. I had folks who kept eyes on my stations for several months, made sure that if they looked like they had fallen over, they picked them up. They showed me the best places to put these stations. Overall, people were just a joy to work with here. And I hope I get to come back again soon to do more fieldwork here. So just a big thank you to all you guys in this area. I really appreciated it. So we have time for questions. So the question was looking for if there was any relationship between seismicity in Pahala and activity in Maunaloa leading to the eruption, yeah? Yeah. We did not see any sort of correspondence between the two things. We didn't see any sort of uptick in seismicity within Pahala that then somehow statistically seemed to lead to activity in Maunaloa. The next step for us, this isn't really sort of the same thing as your question, but we are really interested in seeing if there is any sort of link in the patterns of seismicity from Pahala to Maunaloa at all, or if those are totally absent. So the question was if there was a change in depth of these Pahala earthquakes as the swarm has progressed since 2019 or 2015. These events are remarkably repeating. They really stick to about 15 to 24 miles below the surface. They are constantly happening in these same locations. From one year to the next, you just see this, you see earthquakes kind of happening in the same sort of pancake region.
So here in Pahala, like Nifa said, we're not worried about lava coming out underneath. It's a reasonable thing to wonder about because you feel all these earthquakes down here. But in terms of the structure, as Ninfa has shown, it's so far down, it's a different kind of earthquake and signal that we're seeing. So it's a really good question and ties into all the good stuff Ninfa's told us about.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, Dane.
Right.
So that was Ninfa. And yeah, a summary of that talk. I tried to capture a little bit of the flavor of that, right? A little bit of the car horn and the questions and that kind of stuff. I know you were out there to film that. Yeah, what do you remember about that? That sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate it because one of the things that I remember back 4 or 5 years ago when we sat down with Brian Shiro and talked to him about deep Pahala earthquakes, it was, well, we really don't know what these earthquakes are related to. right? And then we talked about that for a while, and then Brian left, and I started to hear more and more talk like, oh yeah, it's the conduit. It's the conduit. It has to be. And it's like, I don't know, where did the confidence come from all of a sudden? Right. And now it was just refreshing. It's like, all right, she's the one that's going to tell us about what's really happening in Pahala. She's like, we don't know what it is. I'm like, all right, see, it's back. When we talk to the seismologists, they're not sure about what it is exactly. Right. There's some variability in here and some not confident in saying anything about it definitive. Right. And so I really appreciated that. Just refreshing to hear just throwing it out there, guys. We're not that confident on this thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, new people, right? New opinions, maybe some new research to be done as well. I mean, I think what really sounds promising is when she says she specializes in tomography, so that's her thing, right? So to actually see the map, the images she produces of that subsurface by a year from now, when they have time to process all that data, because at first they have to actually find all the earthquakes through machine learning. And once they find the earthquakes and have them all precisely located, then they can start doing that ray path analysis after that. So it's like a little later step. It's a lot of processing goes into it to get to that point. So yeah, that'll be really exciting to see when that finally comes out, and maybe we'll get some of the clarity about whether it's really the conduit. But regardless of what they actually produce, I'm sure it'll produce another 10 or 100 questions about, okay, so if we know that part of it, what about this other thing? So that'll be interesting to think about some new puzzles as well too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for that release. I think a lot of people are. We've been waiting for a long time, especially since 2019 and the uptick in activity down there. It's been one of the reoccurring questions that we get, and it's just like, not sure. We can throw out a few possibilities, but we really don't know that much about it. So now we might be able to actually say something about it, which would be great.
Yeah, so we'll look forward to that. Yeah, and then not only that, after that deployment at Pahala, they took all the instrumentation, did the same thing at Kilauea Summit. So it'll probably be a 2-for-1. We'll look for images and tomography of all of that zone as well. And similarly, we'll have more idea about the shallow pathways as well. So really cool to have all this new data drive happening and see the results when they can publish them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that concludes our presentation this week. And next week, we'll try to revisit 1868, as you mentioned. What else have you got?
I don't know. Do we want to bring up the thing we got?
I'm not sure.
We'll save it for next week. The donation that came through.
Okay, yeah, if you want to, yeah, by all means we can.
Yeah, we did get a donation that came through when we were doing our donation drive there. Lorme Hill, $800 donation through the donor box. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Mahalo,
that's awesome. Yeah, definitely helps. Keep the lights on, you know. we have to add quarters to the little machine to keep it running, you know, as Ken would say.
For sure, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that donation. Yeah,
for sure.
And thank everybody for tuning in today. We rely on viewers like you to help get this information out there. The likes, subscriptions, the shares, they all help. So definitely, if you can't, donate, don't feel bad. Just, throw a comment in the way, and it helps us out. And we appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. Thanks, Lou, on the back end. And until next week, Thursday, unless something happens before then. From HVerry, I'm Philip Ong. Let's see, where are you today, Dane? You're over there today now. That's Dane DuPont. Aloha, everybody.